Maren Reeves, my best friend, suddenly told me she'd gotten back together with her ex. I tore into her for going back to a man who'd already hurt her, but she only gave me a bitter smile. Maybe some people are just destined to keep getting tangled up with each other. Renee, I don't need your validation. I just don't want you to be mad at me. At the time, I didn't understand what Maren really meant. I thought she was only worried I'd get worked up over that jerk again. Seeing the conflict on her face, I couldn't bring myself to keep scolding her. I simply hugged her and told her not to settle for anything that made her unhappy. Then a year later, I went to the hospital because of severe menstrual cramps and unexpectedly saw her leaving the maternity ward. Confused, I was about to approach her when a man hurried over, carefully helping her along and fussing over her every need. In an instant, I instinctively ducked behind the corner, my entire body trembling uncontrollably, because that man was none other than Isaiah Cole, my husband of 3 years. I pressed myself against the cold tile wall, clamping both hands over my mouth as I held my breath. Through the narrow opening beyond the corner, I watched Isaiah Cole, my husband, the man I'd loved for 5 years and been married to for 3, carefully support Maren Reeves, my best friend of 7 years. The tenderness on his face was one I knew all too well. Isaiah lowered his head and murmured something to her, then casually reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Maren stared down at the report in her hand, her expression unreadable, but her other hand drifted instinctively to her still flat stomach. As they walked away, something compelled me to follow them, keeping my steps slow and quiet. I trailed them all the way to the parking garage, where I watched Isaiah open the passenger door and place one hand against the roof of the car, shielding Maren's head as she climbed inside. The black Maybach glided smoothly out of the hospital, its taillights blurred into streaks of crimson before my eyes. I stood alone in the vast underground garage, my entire body shaking uncontrollably. It was early fall, but I felt as though I'd been plunged into freezing water. Cold sweat soaked through the back of my shirt. My phone suddenly vibrated twice inside my purse, the sound jarring in the deathly silence. With trembling fingers, I unlocked the screen. 2 text messages appeared, one after the other. The first was from Maren. Renee, are your cramps any better today? I sent you some heating patches. Remember to stay hydrated, okay? I'm not feeling great today, so I won't be coming to the office to keep you company. Love you. The second was from Isaiah. Babe, an important meeting came up, and I can't get away to pick you up from the hospital. Be good and take an Uber home. I'll bring you that Mont Blanc cake you love tonight to make it up to you. A violent wave of nausea surged up my throat. I doubled over the nearest trash can and retched until there was almost nothing left in my stomach. Tears struck the concrete floor, leaving dark spots behind. It was disgusting. I had no idea how I was supposed to go home and face Isaiah. I had even less idea how I could return to the office and look Maren in the eye. I felt like a spectacle stripped bare and abandoned in the middle of a crowded street. So I fled the city center in a panic, took a cab straight to my parents' house, and requested an extended leave of absence from work. The moment I opened the front door to my parents' house, my mother, Victoria Bentley, looked up from the sweater she was knitting. My father, Randy Bentley, sat beside her with his headphones on, listening to an old-time radio drama. At the sound of the door, Mom looked up. The instant she saw my face, the ball of yarn slipped from her hands and fell to the floor. Renee? What are you doing? What's wrong? Why do you look so pale? Dad yanked off his headphones and hurried over. The moment I saw the concern and love written all over their faces, the last of the strength that had kept me going finally gave out. Dad. Mom. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the rug by the front door. Then, like a child who had been hurt beyond repair, I burst into tears. Between broken sobs, I told them everything I had seen at the hospital, and showed them the 2 sickening text messages. Dad shook with fury. He slammed his palm against the coffee table so hard the cups rattled. That scoundrel. That ungrateful lowlife. I'm going to his office right now, and when I'm done with him, he'll wish he'd never been born. And your so-called best friend? We've always treated her like family. How could she do something this despicable? Mom wrapped her arms tightly around me, crying as she rubbed my back. You've never been treated this way. Divorce him. You have to divorce him. Our family doesn't need a damn thing from his. I grabbed the hem of Dad's shirt, wiped my tears away with the back of my hand, and shook my head. I'm going to divorce him. But I'm not letting him walk away from this without consequences, and I'm not ending my marriage without knowing the whole truth. When they saw the resolve in my swollen, bloodshot eyes, my parents fell silent. They knew me too well. I had never been someone who could look the other way after being betrayed. Dad's eyes reddened as he crouched in front of me and stroked my hair. All right, Renee. We won't do anything reckless. But remember this. No matter what you decide or how far you want to take it, if the whole world comes crashing down, your mother and I will hold it up for you. I spent the next 3 days at my parents' house in a daze. Then the private investigator I had paid a small fortune delivered a thick manila envelope. I drew a deep breath, trying to prepare myself for whatever was inside. I wasn't the only person caught up in this anymore. There was also the ex with whom Maren had supposedly gotten back together. But when I opened the envelope, the truth hit me like a sledgehammer. Isaiah was her ex. I had always known there was a man who had broken Maren's heart, but I had never met him. She had told me the memories were too painful, so she had deleted everything connected to him and refused to even say his name. However, on an old private social media account, she had kept more than 5 years' worth of photos and posts from over a decade ago, preserving every trace of their sweet, innocent young love. They were childhood sweethearts. From 18 to 22, they had loved each other with a passion neither of them had ever forgotten. They had shared an entire history, yet when I first introduced them, they had pretended to be complete strangers. According to the investigators' report, Isaiah's parents had looked down on Maren's family for being poor and considered her beneath their social standing. They had refused to accept the relationship under any circumstances. In the photographs, Isaiah's eyes burned with an intensity one had never seen before. He had once stood outside in a torrential downpour for Maren. He had even begged his parents to let them be together. As independent and resilient as ever, Maren had fought beside him every step of the way. Unfortunately, his family had done everything they could to humiliate and crush her. They had driven her mother to the brink of taking her own life. In the end, the two of them were forced apart. She had left town, and he had fallen gravely ill. I let out a sudden laugh. I laughed until tears splashed onto the pages. So what if I was the perfect match for him? Compared to the tragic, all-consuming love story between the two of them, every sweet memory Isaiah and I had shared felt as bland as plain water. I met Isaiah when I was 27 at a charity gala. We hit it off immediately, talking for hours as if we'd known each other forever. I thought he was the soulmate fate had chosen for me, but maybe the reason we connected so effortlessly was that I was so much like Maren. I'd always cherished the natural chemistry and unspoken understanding Maren, and I shared as best friends. Now looking back, every one of those similarities had become a thorn lodged deep in my heart. The woman he could never forget had carved herself into his soul. I had only ever been her replacement. A thought suddenly struck me. My fingers hurriedly flipped through the journal, until I found the answer I'd been desperate to know. When had their affair started again? A year ago, the night before Isaiah and I celebrated our second wedding anniversary, he got drunk at a business dinner and out of sheer habit, called the number he knew by heart, Maren. She picked him up that night, and they ended up at a hotel. Neither of them came out until morning. After that, the same mistake kept happening over and over again. As I replayed every suspicious detail from the past year, I wanted nothing more than to slap myself across the face. Maybe some people are just destined to stay tangled together. Renee, I don't need your validation. I just don't want you to be angry with me. Maren's words echoed through my mind once again. I wasn't angry. I was disgusted. If they were destined to belong together, then what was I? Just the obstacle standing in the way of their destiny? I locked myself in my room for an entire day. The following day, I returned to the place where I'd lived for the past 3 years, where I'd believed was home. The moment I opened the front door, I saw a warm floor lamp glowing softly in the living room. Isaiah was sitting on the couch in gray loungewear, flipping through a stack of documents. The instant he heard the door, he set everything aside and walked over. As naturally as breathing, he took my bag from my hand and pulled me into his arms. You're finally home, sweetheart. Everything okay with your mom? His voice was low and gentle, carrying just the right hint of concern. He smelled faintly of body wash. It used to be the scent that made me feel safest. Now it made my stomach churn. Yeah, everything's taken care of. I dug my fingernails into my thigh, forcing myself not to shove him away as I let him hold me. I stayed a few extra days with my parents. Sorry for making you worry. His eyes flickered for just a second, almost as if he'd finally relaxed. He reached up and brushed my cheek with his thumb. You still look a little pale. I'll have Maria make you some chicken broth tomorrow. He paused before smiling. Oh, and Maren's been asking about you too. She said you've been out of the office, and she hasn't had anyone to chat with. Hearing her name roll off his tongue so naturally made my heart seize as though someone had driven a needle straight through it. The two of them really were perfect actors. One played the devoted lover in bed. The other played the devoted best friend outside of it. I swallowed the icy hatred rising inside me and smiled as if nothing was wrong. I've missed Maren too. I looked into his eyes. Isaiah, next month is our 3rd wedding anniversary. I want to throw a big party. Everyone's been so busy these past few years. I'd love to invite all our friends and celebrate properly. What do you think? Of course. Smiling, he leaned down and kissed my forehead. As long as it makes you happy, do whatever you want. I'll have my assistant book the venue. The next day, I called Maren. She picked up after the very first ring. Her voice was filled with concern, flawless enough to fool anyone. Renee, you finally called. Are you feeling better? I've been so worried about you. I smiled, though there wasn't a trace of warmth in my eyes. I'm fine now, Maren. Next month is Isaiah and my 3rd wedding anniversary. We're throwing a party, and as my best friend, you have to be there. There was the briefest pause before she answered, her voice carrying a hint of strained restraint. Of course. Just send me the date. I'll definitely be there. Great. My tone stayed light, while my gaze turned ice cold. Maren, make sure you dress up. After all, there's going to be a very big surprise that day. After hanging up, I tossed my phone onto the table and closed my eyes in exhaustion. A month later, in the grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel, the city's most luxurious hotel, Isaiah had rented out the entire top floor. The ballroom looked like something out of a fairy tale, decorated everywhere with white roses I'd once casually mentioned I liked. And yet, the guest of honor, the woman everyone was waiting for, was sitting 20 miles away in the airport VIP lounge. On my phone, my parents were live streaming everything for me. On the screen, Isaiah, dressed in a perfectly tailored custom suit, moved gracefully through the crowd with a champagne flute in hand. However, the way he kept checking his watch betrayed the anxiety he was desperately trying to hide. Not far from him, beside the dessert table, stood Maren. She wore a champagne-colored gown with a loose, flowing silhouette. Though she'd deliberately chosen it to hide her pregnancy, after another month, the slight curve of her belly was beginning to show. The two of them kept their distance from one another, staying careful and doing everything they could to avoid attracting suspicion. I glanced at the time in the corner of my screen. It was almost time. The show was about to begin. A second later, the massive carved doors of the ballroom swung open. The once lively room fell instantly silent. Every head turned toward the entrance. The woman of the evening wasn't there. Instead, Dad walked in first, wearing a tailored black suit, his face dark with fury. Beside him was Mom in an elegant pantsuit, her expression razor sharp. Following behind them were 4 bodyguards dressed entirely in black. Isaiah froze for a split second before immediately putting on his practiced smile and hurrying over. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? He looked past them, his brow tightening. Where's Renee? Why isn't she with you? Standing near the back of the crowd, Maren also walked over. Victoria, where's Renee? Mom ignored her completely and didn't answer Isaiah either. She couldn't even be bothered to fake a polite smile. Dad said evenly, barely containing the rage beneath his voice. Isaiah, Renee had something come up today. For the first time, Isaiah seemed to realize something was terribly wrong. The smile on his face slowly stiffened. Dad, did something happen? No ruse. Mom let out a cold laugh before striding straight to the ballroom's control booth in her high heels and picking up the microphone. I'm sorry to everyone here today. I know you're all friends of Renee and Isaiah's. Her voice rang clearly through every corner of the ballroom. Unfortunately, Renee won't be joining us tonight. A murmur spread through the crowd. But she did ask me to bring everyone a surprise. She reached over and pressed the play button. The giant LED screen, which had been looping our wedding photos moments before, flickered. The music cut off. Then a high-definition photograph filled the massive screen without warning. In it, 19-year-old Maren and Isaiah stood in each other's arms, smiling sweetly at the camera. They looked completely, hopelessly in love. The collective gasp that rippled through the grand ballroom of the Langford Hotel was like the rustle of dry leaves before a storm. On the massive, floor-to-ceiling LED screen, the 19-year-old versions of Isaiah Cole and Maren Reeves stared back at 300 of New York's highest society elite. In the photo, Isaiah was laughing, his arm wrapped tightly around Maren's waist against the backdrop of a sunlit college campus. Isaiah's face went entirely white. What is this? He stammered, stepping toward the control booth. Mom, turn that off right now. Someone loaded the wrong drive. Victoria Bentley didn't move an inch. She stood behind the podium, her posture straight, her expression carved from solid granite. Don't rush, Isaiah, Victoria said into the microphone, her voice ringing crisp and clear over the high-definition speakers. The show is just getting started. With a soft click, the screen transitioned. The nostalgic, youthful photograph dissolved, replaced by a dark, high-resolution security camera capture. The timestamp in the top right corner glowed in bright neon green. October 14th, 2:14 a.m. Exactly 1 year ago, the night before Renee and Isaiah's second wedding anniversary. The image showed the exterior corridor of the St. Regis Hotel. Isaiah, clearly intoxicated, was slumped against a doorframe, his arms slung over Maren's shoulders. Maren was swiping a keycard into the door, her face tilted up toward his, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. A second image flickered onto the screen. Timestamp, 9:30 a.m. Maren stepping out of the same hotel room, wearing the same clothes from the night before her, hair slightly messy. Murmurs erupted across the room like a wave. Is that Maren Reeves? Renee's best friend? Good grief, on the eve of his anniversary. Look at the date. Maren stood near the dessert table, her glass of sparkling water slipping from her numb fingers. It shattered against the polished marble floor, spraying water and glass shards across her designer heels. She didn't seem to notice. Her eyes, were fixed on the screen, wide with a terrifying, paralyzing horror. "Stop it!" Maren shrieked, her voice cracking as she lunged toward the stage. "Victoria, please. Turn it off. You're ruining everything." Randy Bentley stepped forward, his heavy, imposing frame blocking her path like a brick wall. He looked down at Maren, the girl he and his wife had welcomed into their home for 7 years, the girl they had treated like a second daughter, funding her design courses and inviting her to family holidays, with a look of pure unadulterated disgust. "Stay right there, Maren," Randy said, his low voice carrying a heavy, dangerous weight. "You wanted everyone to know your love story, didn't you? We're just helping you tell it." The screen flickered again. This time, it wasn't a photograph. It was a scanned document, a high-resolution PDF of an ultrasound report from the New York Presbyterian Maternity Ward, dated 3 weeks ago. Patient name, Maren Reeves. Gestational age, 11 weeks. Accompanying guardian. Signature, Isaiah Cole. Directly beneath the ultrasound report were several high-definition screenshots of text messages. "Maren. Renee suspects nothing. She actually thinks I'm staying home because I'm sick. Isaiah. Good. The doctor said the baby is stable. Take your vitamins. I'll come over after I finish dinner with her. Maren. Sometimes I feel guilty. Isaiah. But maybe some people are just destined to stay tangled together. Isaiah. You don't need her validation, Maren. I'm the one who loves you. I'll give you and our child the title you deserve." The ballroom fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The high society guests, socialites, corporate executives, board members of Cole Enterprises stared at the screen in utter disbelief. Isaiah stared at his own handwriting magnified 20 feet high on the wall. His chest heaved as if he were suffocating. He turned wildly toward the crowd, looking for a way out, but Randy Bentley's 4 bodyguards lined the perimeter of the room, standing like silent sentinels. Victoria leaned into the microphone one last time. Her voice was flat, devoid of any anger, carrying only a cold, chilling finality. "My daughter, Renee Bentley, spent 3 years being a faithful wife to a scoundrel and 7 years being a loyal friend to a snake," Victoria announced. "Tonight, she officially files for divorce on the grounds of severe marital fraud and infidelity." She paused, looking directly at Isaiah's pale, trembling face. "As of 8 o'clock this evening, the Bentley Group has officially terminated all commercial credit lines, joint ventures, and supply chain partnerships with Cole Enterprises. Our legal team has already filed injunctions to freeze all joint marital assets." Victoria set the microphone down on the podium. "Consider this party our graduation present to the two of you," she said softly. "Enjoy your destiny." At that exact moment, 20 miles away in the VIP lounge of John F. Kennedy International Airport, I watched the stream cut to black on my iPad screen. I took a quiet, deep breath, set the tablet inside my leather tote bag, and stood up. Outside the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the evening sky was a deep, velvet blue. The silver wing of a Boeing 777 gleamed under the runway lights. "Flight 108 to London Heathrow is now boarding all first-class passengers," the automated announcement chimed through the speakers. I picked up my passport, smoothed down the front of my trench coat, and walked toward the gate without turning around once. The storm that hit New York high society that night was swift, brutal, and total. By midnight, the screenshots of the ultrasound, the hotel security footage, and the text logs had leaked from the Langford Hotel ballroom onto every major social media platform and financial news outlet in the state. The headlines were merciless. Cole Enterprises heir exposed. 3-year marriage a cover for affair with wife's best friend. Bentley Group severs all ties with Cole Enterprises. Following high society anniversary scandal. Cole Enterprises stock plummets 18% in after-hours trading. Inside the master suite of the penthouse I had shared with Isaiah for 3 years, the lights were all on, but the apartment felt like a tomb. Isaiah stood in the center of the living room, frantically dialing my phone number over and over again. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again." He threw his phone against the wall. The screen shattered, spraying glass across the hardwood floor. "Renee!" he screamed into the empty apartment. "Renee, answer me." The front door slammed open with a violent bang. Isaiah's father, Marcus Cole, the chairman of Cole Enterprises, marched into the foyer, his face dark with fury. Behind him was Isaiah's mother, Eleanor Cole, her eyes red and swollen. Without a single word, Marcus stepped forward and delivered a heavy, ringing slap across Isaiah's face. Smack. The force of the hit sent Isaiah stumbling backward into the sofa, his lip splitting, blood dripping onto his white collar. "You idiot!" Marcus roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandelier above. "You arrogant, brainless fool. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Dad," Isaiah choked out, holding his bleeding lip. I can fix this. I just need to find Renee. Fix it. Marcus threw a thick stack of financial reports directly at Isaiah's head. The papers scattered across the floor. The Bentley Group pulled their 30% equity stake from our harbor development project an hour ago. The banks have frozen our short-term credit lines. Our board of directors is holding an emergency vote at 7 tomorrow morning to remove you as chief operating officer. Eleanor Cole fell onto the sofa, weeping hysterically. Isaiah, how could you be so stupid? We spent 5 years trying to get you married to Renee Bentley. Her family's capital was the only thing keeping our expansion afloat. And you threw it all away for that girl. Maren is carrying my child. Isaiah yelled back, his voice raw, his eyes bloodshot with desperation. 10 years ago, you two forced us apart because her family was poor. I lost her once. I wasn't going to let her suffer again. She's a parasite. Marcus spat, stepping into Isaiah's space and grabbing him by the lapels of his suit jacket. 10 years ago, she took $200,000 from your mother to leave the city. Did she ever tell you that, Isaiah? She took the check, bought an apartment in Chicago, and only came back when she realized you were married to the Bentley heiress. Isaiah froze. His breath hitched in his throat. What? What did you say? She sold you out 10 years ago for $200,000. Eleanor sobbed, pulling a yellowed bank receipt from her handbag and shoving it into Isaiah's hands. Look at it. Look at her signature. She didn't leave because she was tragic or heartbroken, Isaiah. She left because she was bought. Isaiah looked down at the paper in his hands. The date was 10 years ago. The signature at the bottom, written in neat, familiar cursive, belonged to Maren Reeves. The world seemed to spin beneath his feet. Everything he had believed for the past decade, the tragic, unfulfilled, star-crossed romance, the sacrifice, the deep, unspoken bond that he thought justified betraying his wife, collapsed into a pile of filthy, calculated lies. Right then his phone, lying cracked on the floor, began to ring again. It was Maren. Isaiah stared at her name flashing on the broken glass screen. He didn't pick it up. For the first time in his life, a cold, suffocating terror settled deep in his chest, not because his company was failing, but because he realized that the woman who had truly loved him, the woman who had built a warm, quiet, perfect home for him for 3 years, was gone. And she was never coming back. London in late autumn was rainy, cold, and quiet. In a sleek, light-filled office overlooking the Thames, I sat behind a white oak desk, reviewing the Q3 expansion strategy for Bentley International's European venture capital branch. My hair was cut into a sharp, shoulder-length bob. I wore a tailored ivory suit, my face clean, composed, and radiant. A soft knock sounded on the door. My assistant, Clara, walked in, setting a cup of hot black tea and a tablet on my desk. Ms. Bentley, Clara said politely. The monthly intelligence report on Cole Enterprises has just arrived from New York. I didn't stop typing on my laptop. Give me the summary. Cole Enterprises' market valuation has dropped by 62%, Clara reported cleanly. They defaulted on their commercial bonds last Tuesday. Mr. Marcus Cole was forced to sell his personal real estate holdings to avoid liquidation, and Isaiah Cole was officially stripped of all executive authority by the board. I took a slow sip of my tea. The warm, rich flavor washed over my tongue. And Maren, Clara's lips twitched with a subtle, professional disdain. Miss Reeves gave birth 6 weeks ago to a baby boy. However, because Mr. Isaiah Cole's personal accounts are frozen under the divorce proceedings, they are currently living in a rented 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. Is that so? I asked smoothly. According to our local sources, Clara continued, there have been multiple domestic disturbance complaints filed by their neighbors. Mr. Cole has been drinking heavily, and Miss Reeves has been seen arguing with him in the building hallway regarding living expenses. I set my teacup down on the saucer with a quiet clink. Thank you, Clara. That will be all. Yes, Miss Bentley. When the door clicked shut, I pulled the tablet toward me and opened the file. Attached to the report were several candid photographs taken by a private investigator in New York. In one photo, Isaiah was stepping out of a cheap convenience store in Queens. He looked unrecognizable. The crisp, tailored custom suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, stained jacket. His jaw was covered in dark, unkempt stubble, his eyes hollow and vacant. He was holding a plastic bag filled with cheap beer and frozen meals. In another photo, Maren was standing on the narrow balcony of the rented apartment holding a crying infant. She wore an oversized, faded cardigan, her face pale, thin, and exhausted, without a trace of the glamorous, effortless beauty she used to parade around me. I looked at those photographs for 3 seconds. I felt no joy. I felt no sorrow. I felt no lingering sting of betrayal. I felt the absolute, profound weight of indifference. When Isaiah and Maren had embarked on their secret, romantic affair they had convinced themselves that they were star-crossed lovers, bound by an tragic, unbreakable destiny that excused every lie, every deception, and every betrayal. They believed that their love was a grand, beautiful flame. They didn't realize that the flame had only burned so bright because I was the one paying for the fuel. Without the Bentley family's money, without my quiet, meticulous management of Isaiah's life, without the social status that my presence conferred upon them, their destiny was nothing more than two broke, bitter people trapped in a cramped apartment with a crying child, drowning in mutual resentment. I swiped the file closed, dragged it into the trash folder, and hit permanently delete. I opened my calendar, clicked on the confirmation link for the upcoming European Luxury Investment Summit in Geneva and scheduled my flight. My life was wide, bright, and endlessly open, and I had no time to waste on ghosts. 18 months later, the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel de Bergs in Geneva was packed, with over 500 international investors, venture capitalists, and corporate leaders. The European Luxury Investment Summit was the premier event of the financial season. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking Lake Geneva, holding a glass of vintage champagne. I wore a backless crimson silk gown that draped flawlessly over my figure, paired with a delicate diamond choker. Beside me stood Julian Vance, the managing partner of Vance Capital, one of Europe's most prestigious private equity firms, and my business partner for the past year. You're the center of attention tonight, Renee, Julian smiled, his deep voice rich and amused as he gestured toward a group of Swiss bankers who were casting appreciative glances in our direction. Half the room is waiting for an introduction. They're not waiting for me, Julian. I laughed softly, taking a sip of champagne. They're waiting for Bentley International's €50 million green tech fund. Same thing. Julian clinked his glass against mine. Just then, a commotion at the main entrance caught the attention of the crowd. A small delegation of American businessmen had entered the room, led by a middle-aged trade representative. Standing near the back of the delegation, looking completely out of place in a slightly ill-fitting, off-the-rack suit, was Isaiah. I stopped swirling my champagne. In 18 months, Isaiah had aged 10 years. His posture was stooped, his face thin, the sharp, arrogant confidence that had once defined him completely erased. He was attending the summit as a low-level junior consultant for a third-tier American trade firm, a job he had managed to secure only through an old college acquaintance after Cole Enterprises went bankrupt. He was circulating through the room, handing out business cards with a strained, desperate smile, being politely brushed off by European executives who had no interest in a fallen New York socialite. And then, as he turned toward the lakefront windows, his eyes landed on me. Isaiah froze as if he had been struck by lightning. The glass in his hand wobbled. He stared at me, at the radiant, breathtaking woman in the crimson dress, surrounded by international billionaires, laughing effortlessly beside Julian Vance. Renee. He breathed, his voice barely an audible whisper. He dropped his business cards onto the floor, completely ignoring the trade representative who was calling his name, and stumbled toward me through the crowd. Julian noticed his rapid approach and raised an eyebrow, stepping slightly in front of me. A friend of yours? An old acquaintance, I replied calmly, setting my champagne glass down on a passing waiter's tray. Give me 2 minutes, Julian. Of course. Julian stepped back, giving us space, though his eyes remained watchful. Isaiah stopped 3 feet away from me. His breathing was ragged. His hands were shaking so hard he had to slide them into his coat pockets. His eyes swept over my face, my hair, my dress filling with a terrifying, agonizing mixture of grief, awe, and desperate hunger. Renee. Isaiah choked out, his voice cracking. It's really you. I looked at him, my expression smooth, polite, and perfectly pleasant, the exact look I gave to hotel staff or passing strangers. Good evening, Mr. Cole, I said cleanly. I hope you are enjoying Geneva. Hearing me call him Mr. Cole seemed to shatter whatever remaining composure Isaiah had left. A dry, terrible sob escaped his throat. He took a frantic step forward, reaching out a hand as if to grab my wrist, but I casually took a step back, maintaining a clean, untouchable boundary between us. Renee, please, don't talk to me like that, Isaiah wept, unbothered by the curious glances of the surrounding European elites. I've been looking for you for 2 years. I went to London. I went to your family's estate in Maine. Your father's guards wouldn't even let me through the gate. My parents are very protective of my peace, Mr. Cole, I replied smoothly. As they should be. I was wrong, Isaiah blurted out, tears overflowing, his hollow eyes trailing down his thin cheeks. Renee, I was insane. I was blinded by a stupid, pathetic childhood fantasy. Maren lied to me. She took money from my mother 10 years ago. She manipulated me. She used me. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a battered, worn photograph, the picture of me from our wedding day 3 years ago, before everything burned down. Look at this, Renee, he begged, holding the photo toward me with shaking fingers. I keep this with me every single day. I don't love her. I never loved her. The moment you left, I realized my whole life was empty. I live in a hell. Every single day, Renee. I looked down at the photograph. Then, I raised my eyes to look straight into his bloodshot, desperate gaze. You live in the home you chose, Isaiah, I said softly, my voice calm, clear, and unyielding. You chose Maren. You chose her on the night before our anniversary. You chose her in the hospital maternity ward. You chose her on the stage of our wedding. I was tricked, he cried out. No, I corrected him gently. You weren't tricked. You were arrogant. You thought that because I loved you, because I was kind to you, I would sit quietly in the corner while you played the tragic romantic hero with another woman. I leaned in slightly, my tone carrying a chilling, absolute truth that slashed straight into his soul. You thought I was your safety net, Isaiah. You thought that no matter how much you humiliated me, no matter how much you hurt me, I would always be there, waiting for you when your little fantasy ended. Isaiah's breath hitched. He stared at me, his mouth open, unable to utter a single word. I didn't leave because I was angry, Isaiah, I continued, offering him a small, beautiful smile. I left because you were no longer worth my time. Right then, Julian stepped back to my side, offering me his arm. Renee, the Minister of Finance is requesting your presence for the opening toast, Julian said politely, ignoring Isaiah as if he were a piece of furniture. Of course, Julian, I said, placing my hand elegantly over his arm. I turned back to Isaiah one last time. Goodbye, Mr. Cole. I hope your destiny brings you all the happiness you deserve. I turned on my high heels and walked away into the glowing, brilliant warmth of the ballroom, surrounded by music, laughter, and light. Behind me, Isaiah stood frozen in the middle of the crowded hall. He dropped his hands to his sides. The wrinkled photograph slipped from his numb fingers, falling onto the polished parquet floor, where it was immediately crushed beneath the dark, expensive shoes of passing billionaires. He watched my red dress vanish into the crowd, knowing with absolute, terrifying certainty that he could run for the rest of his life, but he would never, ever touch a single thread of my world again. 6 months later, New York was bathed in the crisp, golden light of early summer. Inside the private garden of the Bentley estate in Long Island, a quiet, elegant afternoon tea was underway. My parents sat on the sunlit terrace, chatting happily with Julian's parents, who had flown in from Zurich for the weekend. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming white peonies and the sound of soft acoustic guitar music. I sat on a wrought iron bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree, wearing a simple linen sundress, sketchpad on my lap, designing the summer collection for my new international fashion foundation. My mother walked over, holding a tray with a fresh pot of Earl Grey tea. She set the tea down on the stone table, sat beside me, and smoothed a strand of hair behind my ear with that familiar, fierce maternal love. A letter arrived from the court in New York this morning, Victoria said, quietly, pulling an official legal document from her bag. I didn't look up from my sketchbook. What does it say? The final foreclosure on the Cole family's estate was completed yesterday. Victoria reported flatly. Marcus and Eleanor Cole have moved into a small retirement home in New Jersey. And Isaiah. She paused, taking a sip of her tea. Isaiah and Maren officially signed their divorce papers on Tuesday. Maren has taken the child and moved back to her mother's town in Ohio, working as a clerk at a local department store. Isaiah has left New York entirely. I stopped my pencil for a second. I looked out at the sunlit garden, at the blooming peonies, at my parents, laughing on the terrace, at the bright, beautiful life stretching endlessly before me. Mom, I said, turning to her with a warm, radiant smile. Yes, sweetheart. Pass the sugar, please. Victoria stared at me for a second, then broke into a bright, joyful laugh. She picked up the silver sugar bowl and placed a cube into my cup. The tea was warm, sweet, and perfectly clear. Outside the high stone walls of the estate, the dark, distant noise of the past faded into absolute nothingness. And inside the garden, the sun shone bright, clear, and endless, a lifetime of light that no shadow would ever touch again.